ideological criminals on the right, do they get invited to do these kind of things? No. They are repudiated, whereas on the left, they are embraced. You look at something like who is being honored on the college campuses. It used to be that the college campuses honored people who made this country great. A lot of times what we see now in some of the symbols and the buildings that are being named, the college campuses honor people who tried to tear this country down. What am I talking about? Well, at Bard College in New York, they have an Alger Hiss professor of social studies. Alger Hiss was a Soviet spy. There's no debate about this now. He was a turncoat on his country, and yet they have an endowed chair named in his honor. At my alma mater, the University of Massachusetts, the 26-story library on campus is named in honor of W.E.B. Du Bois, a guy who renounced his American citizenship, gratefully accepted the Lenin Peace Prize, had a holiday celebrated in his honor in Maoist China, called Stalin a great and courageous man, was kicked out of the NAACP. For a time, he promoted racial separatism, which was the organization he helped found, and then he basically started talking all this crazy stuff. This is a guy who renounced his citizenship. I'm sure he's rolling in his grave that he's being honored in this country. You look at a few years back, a branch of the City University of New York had a Ho Chi Minh scholarship that they offered. Everyone knows who Ho Chi Minh is, right? They had a Ho Chi Minh scholarship that I guess, was $500 were given to students who applied for the scholarship and could maintain, appropriately enough, a C average. These are the kind of folks that are being honored. There's no equivalent to that on the right, where the right is going out saying, hey, let's find some ex-Nazis to honor or anything like that. That doesn't happen. So what I'm suggesting is that if you hate this country and you're on the right, you're repudiated by conservatives and by everyone else. If you hate this country on the left, you might find yourself getting tenure at some American college. Sir.
Thanks. Melissa's had her hand up longer than I have, so I think she really needs to go next. I'll be brief and concise, and hopefully you can be too, so that more people get to ask questions. Title of your book, I'm assuming you love America, and I really respect what you're talking about, exposing the good, the bad, and the ugly. I agree, couldn't agree more. I just have a quick question. As far as loving America, obviously, freedom and democracy you're talking about, and I think you're right. And one of the elements of democracy I think is really admirable is accountability, the ability to some extent, hold our supposed leaders accountable. So my question is, if you were to find convincing evidence that U.S. elected officials or military leaders had provided covert or overt financial, military, or training support to military or public heads of undemocratic regimes in the name of American interests or in the name of American way of life, and those same undemocratic heads of state that we supported then went on to use this kind of support to maintain their own power at the expense of human rights, international law. My question is simple. If we love America, obviously we want to make sure that it gets better. So I'm not going to be here. The only thing I'll say here is, how would you suggest that American citizens make sure that evidence, such evidence, is widely available, so we can see all the evidence, that it doesn't get locked away in presidential chambers? How do we hold our leaders accountable for aiding and abetting this type of undemocratic regime activity? And brief and concise as I tried to be.
Sure. If you involve yourself in the world outside of Western civilization, you basically have no choice but to ally yourselves with some pretty shady characters. The world, pretty much outside of Western civilization, is not democratic. And so if you want to involve yourself in that world, you're going to take sides with people that are not particularly savory people. Sometimes I don't fault the United States for doing that. Certainly, it was our interests to support the Mujahideen during the war in Afghanistan with the Soviet Union when they invaded, when you have guys in Afghanistan, local indigenous people, saying, if there's 1 million folks in Afghanistan left, that'll be enough to start socialism. We had a moral right to help those guys defeat those people in the Soviet Union. But the idea that somehow we will be able to kind of impose our democratic way of life, freedom, democracy, and some people believe this, I think is a bit far-fetched. You cannot grow roses where weeds have only grown. And I think that's the situation in a lot of the world. It's going to take some time before some of these countries see things a little differently, for the people to see things a little differently. I do the countries that I was talking about with regard to foreign aid, a lot of those countries are countries that are not democratic. Place like Pakistan, you know, they certainly do a lot of despicable things. Egypt would be another country. Up until a few years ago in Egypt, if an Egyptian man raped a woman and he consented to marry her, the charges would be dropped. That's the second greatest beneficiary of U.S. aid. So I'm very critical of some of the support that we've given to some of these countries. I think we should realize that sometimes there are no good players in some of these places in the world, and kind of, I don't want to say draw back, but why should we be giving them billions and billions of dollars? So I recognize your point, and I think it's a valid one. Someone who hasn't asked a question.
I just have a couple observations to make, and I'd like to hear what you have to say about them. You've given a number of very valid examples of the ways in which the non-Western world has practices that we wouldn't condone as Americans. Female infanticide, dowry killings, female genital mutilation. Your example just now of women in Egypt being raped and that law. I would make the suggestion that here you have, on some level, denied the existence of feminist movements in those parts of the world that are working against that, feminist movements that you might identify as leftist movements here in this country. I think you've done the same thing in denying the women of this country agency when you list the great things of America. All the examples you gave of were of men. You addressed Jean Kirkpatrick as a lady, not as a woman.
What's wrong with that? She's a lady.
You use the term, you always use the term men instead of men and women. And in addition, of the two women who've spoken before me, you interrupted one of them, interrupted me, and interrupted the person of color who has spoken.
Who was the person I don't even know what you're talking about, but go ask your question, come on.
And you have referred to black folks rather than black people at least once in the talk.
I referred to folks in Afghanistan, too. Get me on that. I mean, you want to get me on everything, right?
I will not accept the disrespect from you. I sat here through your talk quietly. I took notes.
Let's hear your question. I mean, you're the one.
My question is, what is your response to these observations I'm making as a feminist in the United States who is in solidarity with the feminists working against female infanticide, working against dowry killings, and working to identify their own cultural customs which they disagree with?
Look, this is the bottom line. American feminists, if you talk to them, if you go to a women's studies course, if you sit in on a NOW meeting, the problems that they will confront women in the world include things like lack of sports teams for girls in high school or not enough tax dollars going to abortion. These are the ridiculous issues that feminists in this country are monomaniacally obsessed with. There are real problems facing women in the world. It's too bad American feminists ignore that, and they focus obsessively on problems that are basically non-problems. It's a joke. And so my reaction to it is I'd love to hear some feminists talking about these things rather than the fact that they're not getting, third trimester abortions paid for by the government, because that's what feminists care about in this country. If they really cared about women, they would be talking about things like female genital mutilation, dowry killings, and that sort of thing. They focus their energies almost entirely on America and the West, and we know that America and the West provide women with a better way of life than anywhere else in the world, and yet these people label America the patriarchy and all this sort of nonsense. So I don't think that your view of feminism conforms with reality. Yes, sir. You're on TV, you do.
My name's David Bousman, and I'm one of the college Republicans here. I first also want to commend you on the stance that you've taken on this issue. It's a voice that I believe needs to be heard in the modern media. The question I have for you, which is probably going to be different than the previous ones that have been asked, is how do the people that support your stance take us different steps on the college campus to combat the far left?
Well, I think by bringing in speakers would be one. A lot of students around the country have started college newspapers to try to have a dissenting voice on the campuses, because let's face it, the campuses are the center, the bastion of anti-Americanism in this culture. The vast majority of people in this country love America, 90%, probably more than 90%. But yet you have this core group of people that infest places like the campuses and like Hollywood, and because they have an influence, that is much more massive than the numbers would normally indicate, we need to take them on. We need to take them on through education, through information, and I think that is the correct way to do it, and not through fist fights and that sort of thing. We have time for about one more question.
My name is Christina. I identify with the political left, and I love America. I love my country very much. I would agree with what you said about there being wonderful things about our country, and I would agree that there are problems, just like I think anyone can admit. Certain different issues in our society that people say might have problems right now, like our educational system, homelessness, racism, homophobia, etc. I was wondering if you see any room for extreme revolutionary change within any of those institutions, such as like our schools, or if you think that that would be sort of a termite, as you call it, if we had revolutionary, change in some of our institutions. Do you see room for that?
Sure. The termite idea is not, that's something that's passed around. That's not original to me. With regard to revolution or revolutionary change, as you put it, I'll first talk about revolution. I mean, revolution in a country like ours bespeaks an arrogance amongst those supporting it of folks who want to determine what's good and bad for the rest of us. We have a way of changing the system in this country. We have a way of changing the government, of schools, of things of that nature, homelessness. You can vote. Everyone can vote. That's not something to be taken for granted. Most people living outside of Western civilization don't have the right to choose their own leaders or the policies of their government. We do. Sometimes you might feel a little helpless, and what I see a lot amongst folks, both on the left and the right, is when the country doesn't go their way, they act as if there was some sort of sabotage, or how is it that these policies are being in place when everyone I know in the sociology department agrees with me. Well, most people in the rest of the country may not agree with you, and so the idea that if things don't go your way, and I'm not suggesting that you're doing this, but if things don't go your way, you start whining and talking about revolution and all that kind of thing. Look, the majority of folks agree with you. Things will probably go your way. It may take some time, but if they don't, they're not going to go your way. With regard to change, I mean, certainly a lot of those institutions need change. There are, and I'm reminded of it in Washington, D.C., and I'm reminded of it in a lot of other aspects in my life, that homelessness certainly is a problem. I don't know if government is the solution to that. I think people should probably, society, some of the institutions like churches and foundations should take that upon themselves. But we don't see that. We have a more callous society because I think people look to the government and they say, well, I'm a private citizen. Why should I help this guy out? That's the government's job. It's not the government's job. It's everyone's job to help those type of unfortunate folks out. A lot of the institutions that you cite need change, and I hope there is change. But I don't think, at least as I understand the term revolutionary, I don't think revolutionary change is needed. Let me close on this. Edmund Burke remarked in the late 18th century, to love your country, to love our country ought to be lovely. I would argue that Americans love their country not because America is their country, but we love our country because our country is lovely. Thank you very much. I look forward to signing books for you.
Daniel Flynn is Executive Director of Accuracy in Academia and author of Why the Left Hates America.